all the platforms that the organized pedophile groups have been peddling. The woke left is now implementing them. It is so terrifying. It's not just the southern border. That's just the beginning. We need to connect all the dots and recognize our children are in the crosshairs of spiritual warfare. And this has never happened in the history of this country. It's happened in other cultures. You can go look and see what happens. And when that happens, bad things follow if you believe in a just God. We need to stand up right now. Those who believe, those who understand. And this film is that tool. This film will bring a light. It'll soften hearts. It'll bring enlightenment and understanding and information to the ignorant populace who thinks it's okay to enslave our children in the name of liberating them. And so what we're asking the silent majorities to do is July 4th, go to angel.com/SOF for Sound of Freedom, buy tickets for others, pay it forward. We want 2 million butts in seats the week of July 4th, representing the 2 million children currently in the commercial sex trade. If we get at least 2 million people showing up, I promise you the next week it'll be 4 million. The next week it'll be 8 million. And we will create a movement. It's not about even the story. It's certainly not about me. It's about those children. And then people will recognize it's about our children in this country. Even the ones that seem safe at home. They are not safe at home. They are not safe in public schools. They are being groomed. They are being readied for pedophilia. I promise you it's happening. But we're not awake to it. And I hope this film does that. But it starts with 2 million people going to angel.com/SOF and buying tickets and getting themselves in those theaters nationwide to celebrate in true form Independence Day. And this is the shirt that Angel Studios gave me. God's children are not for sale. It's the tagline. It's the most important line Jim says in the film. God's children are not for sale.
It's the song at the end as well.
Correct. But the children. And the children, every time the children sing in the film, they sing in Latin, God's children are not for sale.
And it also is the story of Miguel and Rosita, right?
Correct.
If I have their names right.
Yes, you
The
do.
two children that inspired everything, right, for the whole story. And any final thought, Jim?
Can we love God's children more than we fear evil?
What a powerful place to end. Jim Caviezel, Tim Ballard, such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you for having us.
Says they don't feel comfortable going home because they had a fight with their mom and dad about TikTok, their Instagram, about bad grades, about drinking and driving or using drugs, whatever the case may be. They have a huge fight. They go to school. They're upset. The teacher sees they're upset. Their friends see they're upset. And they say, why don't you go take a break in the counselor's office?
They then go to the counselor, who can even be an intern.
And that professional person says, well, why don't you go take a break in the shelter down the road for a couple of days, let things cool off, and actually a couple of your friends are already there. Of course the child's going to say, okay, they're talking to their school counselor. They think this person has their best interest in mind. They think that they would not lead them astray or do anything that would ever expose them to any danger.
Pearson says there are plenty of teens who would take the counselor up on their offer, exposing themselves to unknown dangers in residential facilities. Some such places are known to be frequented by predators and drug dealers.
And then you will be facing that uphill battle that will cost you tens of thousands of dollars and months of extraordinary pain to get your child back when you have done nothing wrong. And all the meanwhile, they've been in these overburdened shelters, neglected and exposed to Lord only knows what in the end.
Pearson is sounding the alarm on this bill and asking for public support.
AB 665 is being heard actually this Tuesday, June 20th at 1:30 p.m. in the Senate Judiciary Committee. We encourage and are actually asking everybody to show up at the hearing.
Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Our consent, and we did not give our consent. And I'll set the scene. A swimming locker room is not a place of modesty. You're undressing, you're fully exposed. And we were forced to take off our swimsuit in front of a man who was doing the exact same thing.
Yeah, Tiff also mentioned that later on, she referred to that scene again, and she said that when Thomas came into the locker room, she went out to find an official to say, what is with the deal of a man coming into our locker room? And it was a man, and she said he casually just kind of told her, well, we got around that by making all of these locker rooms unisex. And so some of the girls actually ended up changing in a janitor's closet.
And Dave, in terms of this hearing, did this hearing discuss fairness in sports and why we have separate men's and women's competitions?
Yeah, there was actually another lively exchange when Senator John Kennedy was asking one of the other witnesses about this. This is a Kelly Robinson, who's president of the Human Rights Campaign. She had a different opinion. Riley Gaines ends up joining in this discussion, so let's play that clip now too.
How many female members of the NBA do you see?
Well, I can say that, there's been this news article about men that think that they could beat Serena Williams in tennis, right? That they think that they could actually score a point on her. And it's just not the case. She is stronger than that.
What's your experience, Ben? Male, female?
Both Serena and Venus lost to the 203rd ranked male tennis player, which they're phenoms for women.
Now, Tip, I'd like to point out that, in fairness to Ms. Robinson, I don't think she was talking about professional men's tennis players. But the average male fan, of course, is not going to beat Serena Williams. But Gaines' testimony there is true, though, what she said. And the Williams sisters, they have dominated women's tennis. 30 Grand Slam titles between them in singles and plenty more even in doubles.
And Dave, moving on to basketball now, the NBA draft is tonight. What can we expect to see?
Well, I think the only certainty at this point is that the San Antonio Spurs are going to select this unknown French teenager named Victor Wembanyama. He's unknown because he didn't play college in the U.S. He's only 19 years old, but he led the French league last year in points, rebounds, and block shots. His height is listed anywhere from 7'2" to 7'5". He weighs approximately 240 pounds. But unlike tall players, this is tall even for the NBA, this guy can move. He plays on the perimeter, too. He's a good three-point shooter. He can drive to the basket. Some have called him the best prospect since LeBron James. Now, I got to say, not every draft has this high of a prospect. But for the Spurs, this is the third time a charm for them. 1987, they drafted David Robinson first overall. He went to the Hall of Fame. 10 years later, they got Tim Duncan, another Hall of Famer. So the Spurs franchise has been very fortunate here.
Transparency. I think parents are the primary authorities in the teaching of their children. They really got their start because of the crazy COVID lockdowns and then the onslaught of critical race theory and gender ideology in schools. That's what they're talking about. They're not talking about same-sex marriage or anything like that, but that seems to be what the protesters think they're actually about.
Can you tell us more about what Moms for Liberty and groups like it are, interested in working on in the country?
Absolutely. Moms for Liberty is organized basically by districts or counties, and that's because the two founders of Moms for Liberty were themselves former school board members of the state of Florida, and they realized the incredible amount of power that school boards have. In fact, you might have 6, 7, 8 people that are citizens of a particular town. People probably don't even know their names, and yet they may sit atop some budget for schools of several $100 million. So they have an amazing amount of power, but not a lot of accountability. And so the reality is, even in very conservative red districts, you'll often have far left school boards. And so the curricula, the stuff getting taught to kids in public schools doesn't actually reflect the views of the majority of its citizens. So they focus on school boards, and I think that's part of why they've created such animosity from people on the left who I think had imagined that school boards and school districts was their jurisdiction.
Do you think these issues will be a big issue in the upcoming presidential election?
I absolutely think that's the case. In fact, I think that's why basically all the leading presidential candidates, at least in the GOP, have decided to come up here to Philadelphia. I think they recognize the parents' rights, what's happening in schools, and especially kind of crazy woke ideology is something that is not only, I think, a winning idea across the political spectrum, left, right, and center, but certainly among Republican voters. I mean, I would imagine that they've got 85% of Republicans in agreement with them. That's what Moms for Liberty is focusing on, and so it makes sense. I'm actually glad that they recognize that it's in their political interest to be talking about these issues.
What are groups like Moms for Liberty looking for in the next presidential candidate?
They're looking for a presidential candidate that will actually walk the walk and talk the talk. I mean, the reality is that Republican politicians during the primaries, they always poll test the different things that they say. The reality is people like Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida, I think though Monster Liberty is not endorsing any candidate, I think in many ways he's the sort of ideal because he was actually willing to lean into these issues at a time when a lot of Republicans were frankly afraid to talk about it. I mean, Ron DeSantis has been willing to fight for kids, willing to explicitly call out gender ideology in public schools and to support bills that increase the power of parents over their kids and fighting against this idea that the school is somehow supposed to be the arbiter in any questions between parents and the children.
Jay Richards, thank you.
Stay out of the craziness and focus on God, but this is God. This is also focusing on God in a different way. So.
Well, I know you've been on the pulse of other wokeness like Bud Light, so did you feel it was time again to do this? Was it a form of consciousness for you?
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, this is all of a sudden all of the brands are pushing this, and, you know, our children are the most vulnerable. To walk into a store where they would usually go with their families to now question who they are, who God created them to be. So we have to be careful now, you know?
You know, I think about when Tupac had his form of conscious rap. Would you consider what you're doing with Boycott Target to be something similar?
Tupac was trying to wake up his community about the psychological warfare that was pushing people in the African American community to kill each other, and the vibrations of that music and how everything is controlled by the elite. And he was trying to wake people up, which, you know, in my opinion is why he's no longer here. But we never know, right? But yeah, in a different way, because this is another agenda created by the same people.
I went in Target earlier and I noticed that how a rainbow skirt for a girl could also be very similar to the rainbow skirt in the Pride aisle. Do you think that that's intentional, that they play on the rainbow to sort of target kids?
They play on the rainbow because kids are attracted to colors. And if you get into the mind of a child between the ages of 3 and 7, you have them for life. There's an instilled open portal of trauma, which then demons manifest, and those demons cause a child to have that trauma throughout their life, and that's where the alcoholism comes from. It goes that deep, the drug use, because that's where all of our traumas come from. It opens a portal for demons to minister to us. As crazy as that sounds, that's the spiritual realm of things.
And then
will go into effect on January 1st, 2024. Reporting by Angela Moy, NTD News, Chicago.
What's behind the transgender movement, and what are its implications? To find out, I spoke with award-winning filmmaker Tobias Elvahoga about his new docudrama, Gender Transformation: The Untold Realities. The docudrama is the latest Epoch original documentary, and it's been selected by the Manhattan Film Festival, where it premiered Friday night in New York City. Tobias Elvahoga, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, great to be here.
What inspired you to make this film?
Yeah, I was doing research about transgender, and I came across some different documentaries. And these documentaries, they were like showcasing some cases of children who were going, you know, to transition and think that, you know, they were going to change their gender into another, you know, to another gender. And what actually happened was that many of these cases, they had a lot of bad side effects from these, you know, they start with puberty blockers and then they go on cross hormones. And it was one case that made me, you know, yeah, it was really touching in a way, because this girl, she had been on puberty blockers for 4 years. And after that, she could hardly, you know, stand up for more than 10 minutes. She was totally exhausted. Her, you know, the bone marrow density in her body was so weak, and a lot of other things. So, I mean, her whole life was devastated, and her mother was so, you know, sad for letting her, having, you know, had all this done to her daughter. So after that, I realized the severity of what's happening.
Now, this transgender movement is something that came up just recently for many people. I mean, I know it's been evolving for a few decades, but for many people it's new. What's driving it?
Yeah, that's one of the questions we are really exploring in the documentary. So we have some investigative writer, and she's been following the money. And she's been seeing that there's a lot of wealthy people behind this, so and also companies. So Actually, there's big LGBTQ organizations, and the founders of these organizations, they're actually in charge of medical companies. And this is not only happening in one case; it's like 2 or 3 cases, and then makes you start wondering what's going on. And there's other interests as well. I mean, there's hospitals. They're actually openly admitting that, or openly telling their employees or telling the others at the hospital that this is something that we make a lot of money from. So there's evidence out there. We know there's a like 1.5 billion industry for surgeries alone. So it's a great profit motive.
There's a lot going on behind the scenes.
Chain to remove some Pride merchandise from store shelves, and in some locations, moving displays from the front of stores to the back. In a statement Tuesday, the company cited safety concerns, saying, "Since introducing this year's collection, we've experienced threats impacting our team members' sense of safety and well-being while at work. Given these volatile circumstances, we are making adjustments to our plans, including removing items that have been at the center of the most significant confrontational behavior." Minister Nicole Collins lived as a lesbian for 20 years. She says in a culture that embraces LGBTQ ideals, Christians can make a difference. Today, she runs a Christian clothing line featuring the rainbow.
The Lord literally showed me a vision, and I saw a hand clutching the rainbow in the clouds, and I saw the words inscripted, "Take back the rainbow."
As the battle over this and other issues continue, many stress that violence is never the answer and should be condemned. Collins encourages believers instead pray for the LGBTQ community.
God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten son. He died for the homosexual, he died for the transgender, but that's why we need to be born again. And so I think that the church just needs to be that pillar. We've got to show love without compromising.
Cook agrees.
Every day during Pride Month, we should all as Christians be praying for people to get saved out of that life, just like God did with me.
Well, we are going to pray about that, and I love that line, "Take back the rainbow." But first, want to talk about what happened in India. The death toll stands now at 275, with hundreds more injured. This after a 3-train crash Friday in India. Look at this. It's one of the
images of child sexual abuse. Born male, he went through gender reassignment procedures to resemble a woman. Loughton won races for the New Hampshire state legislature both in 2020 and in 2022, but resigned from the state house. The recent arrest wasn't his first offense. Last November, police detained him on charges of violating a court order which banned him from posting about another person on social media. Turning to international affairs, Russian President Vladimir Putin today addressed his military after the attempted coup that took place over the weekend. Meanwhile, Russia announced it's dropping charges against the armed rebels. Here's an update on the aftermath in Russia.
Russian President Vladimir Putin praised members of Russia's military and security forces in a ceremony on Tuesday.
We protected the Constitution, the lives, the safety, and the freedom of our people. He saved our motherland from turmoil. In fact, he stopped a civil war.
He then requested a minute of silence to honor military pilots killed in the revolt. Russian authorities on Tuesday said they have closed a criminal investigation into the aborted rebellion. There will be no charges against mercenary chief Yevgeny Prigozhin or his troops. This comes just a day after Putin on Monday said he'll bring the rebels to justice. Russia's Federal Security Service said it found that those involved in the mutiny ceased activities directed at committing the crime, so the case would not be pursued. The attempted coup was stopped after Prigozhin made a deal with Russia that allowed him to exile to Belarus in return for calling off the mutiny. However, many experts have since questioned whether Putin will follow that deal, saying Prigozhin's long-term safety is not guaranteed. In early Tuesday morning, Flight Radar 24 monitored a flight which appears to show a business jet linked to Prigozhin flying from southern Russia to Belarus. However, the media team for Prigozhin didn't confirm whether he landed there. Meanwhile, Belarus's President Alexander Lukashenko gave a speech on Tuesday. He didn't comment on Prigozhin and whether he arrived in the country, but instead criticized NATO.
Today, we can clearly see a new wave of NATO enlargement and unprecedented amassing of arms by the alliance's member states in the region.
including in places close to our borders. Almost daily, our border guards document various types of provocations on the state border undertaken by neighboring countries. He said that threats are coming from the West and called on his military to resist.